God of War, released in 2018, tells the story of a father and his son traveling through a world inspired by Norse mythology. After the death of his wife, Kratos sets out with his son, Atreus, to fulfill her final wish. On the surface, it's a journey filled with gods, monsters, and survival. But at its core, it's about something much more grounded: a parent trying to raise a child. Now, what makes that complicated is who Kratos used to be. Before this quiet life in the north, he destroyed the entire Greek pantheon. His rage didn't just end lives, it collapsed a world. And now, years later, that same man is responsible for guiding a boy who has no idea what his father once became. So the question isn't whether Kratos is powerful, it's whether or not he's actually a good father. There's a moment early on in God of War that quietly defines Kratos as a parent. Atreus kills a deer for the first time. It's supposed to be a rite of passage, but when the animal struggles, Atreus hesitates. He feels it and he reacts emotionally. And then Kratos steps in and tells him to finish it. Later, when Atreus loses control in anger during a fight, that's when Kratos says it.
You are not ready.
He's not talking about skill, he's talking about rage. And that distinction matters, because Kratos isn't afraid that Atreus will be weak. He's afraid he'll end up like him. To understand why that fear shapes everything, you have to remember who Kratos was before this game. In the original Greek saga, Kratos was defined by vengeance. He didn't just defeat gods, he obliterated entire realms in the process. His anger didn't stay contained to his enemies. It spilled outward. Oceans swallowed cities, the sky darkened, and civilization collapsed. He wasn't managing trauma, he was spreading it. And by the end of those games, he had nothing left to destroy but himself. So when we meet him in the Norse world, he isn't reborn, he's contained. He's quieter, slower, and more controlled. But control isn't the same as healing, it's suppression. And suppression becomes the foundation of his parenting. Early in the game, Kratos is not a good father. He's present and he protects Atreus, and he trains him to survive. But emotionally, he keeps him at a distance. When Atreus asks questions about his mother, Kratos shortens the conversation. And when Atreus shows fear, Kratos redirects it into discipline. When Atreus expresses emotion, Kratos answers with instruction. And then comes one of the most revealing lines in the entire game. After a brutal encounter, Kratos tells Atreus,
Close your heart to it.
Now that line explains everything. Psychologically, this is emotional suppression, which is a survival mechanism. When someone has experienced extreme trauma, shutting down empathy can feel protective. If you don't feel deeply, you don't break deeply. Kratos learned that lesson the hardest way possible. But teaching a child to close their heart isn't strength, it's armor. And armor might protect you in war, but it isolates you in life. There's something else happening underneath that as well. Kratos doesn't know how to parent because he was never shown how. He grew up in Sparta, a culture that prioritized obedience, endurance, and brutality. Emotional vulnerability wasn't modeled for him, and it wasn't rewarded. In psychology, we talk about intergenerational patterns, which are behaviors passed down not because they're healthy, but because they're familiar. Kratos parents the way he was shaped, rigid, controlled, and uncompromising. Not because he doesn't love Atreus, but because he doesn't understand what love looks like without discipline attached to it. And then Atreus gets sick, and this is where the suppression cracks. Up until that point, Kratos believes strength solves problems. Train harder, control more, close your heart. But illness doesn't respond to strength. When Atreus collapses, Kratos' voice changes. There's urgency and there's fear. And this is the shift from control to attachment. In real life, intense threats to a child often force emotional walls down. The protective instinct overrides suppression. Kratos moves heaven and earth to save him. Not because it's his duty, but because he cannot lose him. That fear is the clearest evidence of love we've seen so far. And then comes the Arrogance Arc. When Atreus learns he's a god, he changes. He becomes dismissive, cruel, and reckless. And he starts treating others as inferior. And it's uncomfortable because it's familiar. Children model behavior more than they obey instruction. Even though Kratos tries to suppress his past, Atreus has grown up watching a man who solves problems through dominance. So when Atreus feels powerful, he imitates that dominance. There's a psychological reality here. Unexamined trauma replicates itself, and Kratos sees himself in his son. And this time, instead of exploding, he intervenes differently. He doesn't crush him, he corrects him. He begins explaining consequences. And that's growth. Not perfection and not sudden warmth, but awareness. One of the most symbolic moments in the entire game may be when Kratos retrieves the Blades of Chaos. Those blades are a physical reminder of who he used to be, rage without restraint. He doesn't reclaim them proudly, he does it reluctantly, because he understands something now. You cannot outrun your past. You can only decide what you teach with it. Eventually, he tells Atreus the truth about being a god. And when he does, he doesn't frame it as superiority, he frames it as responsibility. And that's not who early game Kratos was. That's someone evolving. And then we reach the line that defines the transformation. Except, it isn't a single sentence, and it isn't a dramatic speech. It's a decision. Kratos chooses to tell Atreus the truth. Not a softened version, and not a story where he's misunderstood. The truth. He tells his son that he killed his father, that he destroyed his homeland, and that he was consumed by rage and vengeance and became a monster in the process. For most of the game, Kratos hides that past because he believes knowledge of it will corrupt Atreus. But by the end, he realizes something more important. Silence doesn't protect your child. Honesty does. In real-world psychology, this is the difference between suppression and integration. Suppression is pretending the past doesn't exist. Integration is admitting it does, and choosing to grow beyond it. When Kratos finally tells Atreus who he truly is, he isn't just revealing information. He's breaking a generational pattern. He's showing his son that you can come from violence without being ruled by it. And that's the moment everything changes. Because earlier, Kratos tried to control Atreus through distance. Now, he guides him through truth. He no longer parents from fear, he parents from responsibility. And by the time they reach Jotunheim, Kratos doesn't speak like a general commanding a soldier. He speaks like a father who understands that strength without compassion creates monsters. And he doesn't erase his past, he contextualizes it. He tells Atreus,
Who I was is not who you be. We must be better.
not better warriors, better than the mistakes that made us. So, is Kratos a good father? At the beginning of the game, no. He's emotionally distant, reactive, and afraid of his own influence. But by the end, he's something more realistic. He's a man who recognizes the damage inside himself and chooses not to pass it on. And that might be the most powerful thing he does in the entire game.